Nathan Reynolds had always been a law-abiding homeowner, living in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Texas. At 42, he was a hard-working engineer, enjoying his peaceful life in a house he had purchased years ago. But everything changed at 2:45 a.m. on a cold autumn night. A loud crash shattered the silence. Nathan's eyes snapped open, his heart pounding against his ribs. For a brief moment, he thought he was dreaming, but then he heard it again, a crunching sound, like boots stepping on broken glass. A chill ran down his spine. Someone was inside. Fumbling for his phone on the nightstand, his trembling fingers nearly knocked it to the floor. He opened his home security app, expecting to see nothing more than a stray raccoon setting off a motion sensor. But when the live feed loaded, his blood turned to ice. 3 men were inside his living room, dressed in black tactical gear, their faces obscured by balaclavas. But what sent terror surging through Nathan's veins were the bold white letters emblazoned on their jackets. HOA, Homeowners Association. Nathan's mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The HOA inside his house? That didn't make any sense. HOAs sent letters, fines, maybe even threats. But breaking and entering, this wasn't just an overreach of authority. This was a crime. Then he heard them speak. "Find the safe," one of them growled. "He's got to have cash somewhere. This guy thinks he can ignore us. He's about to learn." Nathan's stomach twisted. This wasn't just a robbery. It was targeted. They knew about his safe. They knew exactly where it was. He slipped out of bed as quietly as possible, his pulse hammering in his ears. He needed a plan. Calling the police was an option, but he knew response times in his area weren't fast enough. By the time officers arrived, these men would be long gone. Judging by how calm and methodical they moved, this wasn't their first time. Nathan crept toward the hallway closet. His father had left him a shotgun years ago, a 12-gauge Remington. He had never used it outside of a shooting range, but he knew how to load it. His fingers fumbled as he pushed shells into the chamber, his breathing quick and shallow. Then he remembered. His security system. 3 years ago, Nathan had dealt with a serious stalking incident. A former co-worker had followed him home late at night, and after that, Homeland Security had stepped in to upgrade his security system. He had agreed to a contract that directly linked his alarm system to their emergency response network. If an intruder triggered the alarm, Homeland Security would be notified immediately. He glanced at his phone. Breach detected. Homeland Security notified. Relief coursed through him. Help was on the way, but he had to survive until they got here. The intruders were getting closer. Heavy boots thudded against the hardwood floor, and one of them even started humming. Humming, like this was just another day at work for them. "You see the cameras?" one of them asked. "Yeah," another voice chuckled. "He knows we're here." Nathan tightened his grip on the shotgun and pressed his back against the wall. His finger rested on the trigger as their footsteps neared the hallway. "You're trespassing!" he shouted, his voice cracking with adrenaline. The men paused. Then one of them laughed. "You think we care?" a deep voice called back. A tall man with broad shoulders stepped into view, gripping a crowbar. The dim light from the hallway gleamed off the metal. "HOA makes the rules around here." Before Nathan could respond, a sound cut through the night. The unmistakable roar of helicopter blades. The deep, rhythmic thud of helicopter blades sent shockwaves through the house. The man with the crowbar froze, his cocky smirk vanishing in an instant. Then came the roar of engines. Tires screeched outside as multiple black SUVs skidded to a stop in front of Nathan's house. "Federal agents! Drop your weapons!" The night exploded into chaos. Red and blue lights flooded through the windows as the front door burst open with a deafening crash. Tactical agents stormed inside, rifles raised, voices barking commands. Nathan barely had time to lower his shotgun before the intruders scrambled to react. One of them bolted toward the back door. He didn't make it. Two agents tackled him mid-stride, slamming him to the ground. The second man reached for his belt. Maybe a weapon, maybe something worse. He was met with the hard slam of a rifle butt to the chest, knocking the air from his lungs. He collapsed in a heap. The last man, the one with the crowbar, stood motionless, his eyes flicking between his captured associates and the swarm of agents around him. Slowly, he raised his hands, but his face was unreadable, calm, even amused. Nathan's knees nearly buckled as the adrenaline crash hit him. He gripped the doorframe, his breaths coming in ragged gasps. An agent in black tactical gear approached, a Homeland Security patch on his shoulder. "Mr. Reynolds?" Nathan nodded, his throat too dry to speak. The agent lifted his visor. "You're safe now." But as the intruders were led out in cuffs, Nathan locked eyes with the tall man who had been holding the crowbar. His cold, steady gaze never wavered. As he passed, he muttered, "This isn't over." Nathan didn't flinch. He was done being afraid. Outside, Nathan sat in the back of an ambulance, his hands still trembling as he watched the scene unfold through the fogged-up window. His house was a disaster. Shattered glass everywhere, furniture overturned, his front door barely hanging on its hinges. But none of that mattered. What mattered was why they had come. An agent, a tall man with a graying beard, approached him. "Mr. Reynolds, are you aware that these men are part of an organized crime ring?" Nathan frowned. "Crime ring? They're just HOA officers, right?" The agent's expression darkened. "Not exactly." He pulled out a notepad. "These men have been targeting homeowners for years. Extortion, threats, property destruction. If the fines didn't break you, they escalated. Some victims disappeared." Nathan's stomach twisted. "Because I was behind on my HOA dues?" "That's how it starts," the agent said. "Small fines, then bigger ones, then fear. Looks like you were next." Nathan clenched his fists. He wasn't just a victim. He was a target, and he wasn't going to let this slide. Nathan sat motionless in the ambulance, the agent's words still echoing in his mind. "They've been targeting homeowners for years. Extortion, threats, property destruction. If the fines didn't break you, they escalated. Some victims disappeared." A slow, burning anger ignited in his chest. This wasn't just about him. How many others had suffered in silence? How many had been too scared to fight back? A bitter laugh escaped his lips, and all because of $100. The agent sighed. "That's how it starts. Small fines, then bigger ones, then fear." Nathan wiped a hand down his face, his exhaustion giving way to something sharper, determination. "So what happens to them now?" he asked. "Burglary, extortion, racketeering, for starters," the agent said. "But HOA cases tend to get complicated." Nathan narrowed his eyes. Complicated how? The agent hesitated before answering. HOAs operate in a legal gray area. They function as private entities, with their own rules and bylaws. That gives them a lot of freedom to bend or break the law without consequence. Their lawyers are aggressive, and they have powerful backers. Nathan sat up straighter. "You're saying they could walk?" The agent didn't answer right away. It's possible. Some charges might not stick. Nathan's jaw tightened. Not if I have anything to say about it. The agent studied him carefully. What are you planning to do? Nathan exhaled slowly. He didn't know exactly, not yet. But one thing was certain. This wasn't over. 2 days later, Nathan sat across from Sarah Monroe, his lawyer, in her sleek downtown office. She was sharp, ruthless, the kind of attorney who made judges nervous. She flipped through a thick stack of papers. They broke into your house, Nathan. He leaned forward. And I want them destroyed. Sarah arched a brow. Destroyed? I don't want a slap on the wrist. I want them in prison for the rest of their lives. I want their HOA license revoked. I want them to lose everything. Her lips curled into a slow, knowing smile. Good. I was hoping you'd say that. She slid a folder across the table. We're filing charges for armed robbery, home invasion, conspiracy, and extortion. That alone could get them 20 years. Nathan wasn't satisfied. Not enough. Sarah's eyes gleamed. Then you'll love this. I dug into their HOA records. Turns out they've been embezzling funds from homeowners for years. That opens the door to federal fraud charges. Nathan's heart pounded. How much time does that add? Another 20 years, minimum. He exhaled slowly, his hands curling into fists. Perfect. This wasn't just about revenge. This was justice. The trial began 2 weeks later. Nathan sat in the front row of the courtroom, just behind the prosecution's table. He had barely slept since that night, but he wasn't tired. He was focused. He watched as Greg Landon, the ringleader of the HOA crime ring, was led into the defendant's box, flanked by his lawyer. Greg had shaved his head, trading his HOA uniform for a sharp suit. His expression was unreadable, cold, composed, as if he were still in control. The prosecutor, Daniel Reese, wasted no time laying out the case. He detailed the illegal fines, the threats, the break-in, the security footage. Then came the most damning piece of evidence, the audio recordings of Greg ordering his men to get the safe. Greg's lawyer, a slick-looking man named Andrew Bishop, cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my client was simply enforcing HOA rules. The courtroom stirred. Nathan clenched his jaw. Enforcing rules? At 2 a.m. with crowbars and ski masks? The prosecutor leaned forward. So, Mr. Bishop, are you saying the HOA has a policy for armed robbery? Greg's lawyer faltered. That's not what I meant. Then explain to the jury why your client and his associates were caught on video forcing their way into a private residence. Bishop opened his mouth, but no words came out. Then Greg spoke. People need to learn that rules exist for a reason, he said smoothly. Nathan's fists tightened beneath the table. And if someone doesn't follow the rules? The prosecutor asked, raising an eyebrow. Greg's lip curled. There are consequences. The arrogance in his voice made Nathan's skin crawl. The prosecutor smirked. Consequences like breaking into a man's home and holding a crowbar to his head? Greg's smirk faltered. The jury murmured. Greg leaned toward his lawyer, whispering furiously. For the first time, Nathan saw it. Fear beneath the arrogance. He knew he was losing. The prosecution rested its case, and the jury was sent to deliberate. It didn't take long. Guilty, on all counts. Greg's shoulders sagged. The judge's voice rang through the silent courtroom. Mr. Landon, you are hereby sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole. As Greg was led past Nathan, he sneered. This isn't over. Nathan leaned back, exhaling slowly. Yes, it is. 2 days later, Nathan received a call. This is Agent Walker from Homeland Security. Nathan's pulse spiked. What's going on? Your testimony helped us crack open something much bigger. Greg Landon wasn't the mastermind. He was taking orders from someone higher up. Nathan's grip tightened on the phone. How high up? Walker's voice darkened. We're still working on that. Nathan stood in his kitchen, staring at the framed letter from Homeland Security. Your bravery has helped dismantle a national criminal operation. He should have felt victorious. He had won. Greg Landon was behind bars, his HOA empire shattered. But something about Agent Walker's words lingered. We're still working on that. The thought made his stomach churn. Greg wasn't the mastermind. Someone higher up had been pulling the strings. Nathan was done being a victim. But was he ready to be something more? A week later, a black SUV pulled up outside his house. Nathan instinctively tensed. He had started carrying ever since the break-in. When the driver stepped out, a tall man in a dark suit with federal agent written all over him. Nathan's hand hovered near his hip. Relax, the man said. Agent Walker sent me. Nathan didn't lower his guard. What's going on? The agent reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. Greg Landon is talking. Nathan's breath hitched. And? The agent handed him the folder. Nathan flipped it open, his eyes scanning the contents, names, addresses, financial records. Landon wasn't just running a corrupt HOA, the agent explained. He was part of a network, an organization operating in multiple states, using HOA boards as a front for fraud, money laundering, and organized extortion. Nathan exhaled sharply. He wasn't surprised. He felt it that night, the way Greg had spoken, the way he had threatened him even after being arrested. Greg had never been the one in charge. And now? Nathan asked. The agent's face hardened. We need you to testify again. Nathan hesitated. The first trial had nearly broken him. Reliving that night, seeing Greg's smug face in court. But then he thought of the other homeowners, the ones who had been too afraid to fight back, the ones who didn't get a chance to stop it before it was too late. Nathan shut the folder and looked up at the agent. When do we start? That night, as Nathan sat on his porch, watching the quiet suburban street, he finally let himself breathe. For months he had been reacting, surviving, fighting just to keep what was his. Now he was on the offensive. The HOA thought they could control him, thought he was just another homeowner too weak to resist. They were wrong. He wasn't afraid anymore. He was just getting started. The second trial was bigger, more public, more dangerous. Nathan sat in the witness stand again, this time in a federal courtroom, staring across at a row of defendants, HOA executives, corporate investors, even a former city official. These weren't just power-hungry neighborhood enforcers like Greg Landon. These were the people who had enabled him. They thought they were untouchable. The prosecution presented evidence, financial records, wire transfers, testimonies from other victims. They painted a clear picture. The HOA wasn't just a homeowners association. It was an empire built on intimidation and corruption. Nathan's testimony was the final blow. He told the jury everything: the fines, the threats, the break-in. The moment Greg Landon smirked and told him, HOA makes the rules. Now, the judge made the rules, and the verdict was clear. Guilty, on all counts. Nathan stepped outside the courthouse, inhaling deeply. The air felt lighter. Agent Walker approached, hands in his pockets. You did it. Nathan smirked. We did it. Walker exhaled. This case is going to set a precedent. Homeowners across the country are watching. They'll know they don't have to be afraid anymore. Nathan nodded. Good. Walker hesitated. You know, we could use someone like you. Nathan raised an eyebrow. You're recruiting me? Walker chuckled. Not officially, but if you ever want to put that fight to good use, you know where to find us. Nathan didn't answer right away. He had spent so much time trying to defend himself, trying to keep what was his. But now, maybe it was time to go on the offensive. A month later, Nathan stood on his porch, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over his now peaceful neighborhood. No more strange knocks at the door. No more threats in the mailbox. No more fear. He glanced at the framed letter from Homeland Security inside his house. It used to feel like an ending. Now it felt like the beginning. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. There's another case you might want to look at. Call me if you're interested. Nathan smirked. Maybe his fight wasn't over after all. Power unchecked is power abused. Nathan Reynolds learned that even institutions meant to protect can become dangerous when accountability disappears. The HOA in his neighborhood had morphed from a governing body into a criminal syndicate, fining, threatening, and finally invading his home. But fear only wins when we allow it. By standing his ground, Nathan became more than just a survivor. He became a symbol of resistance. He reminded us that ordinary people can confront corruption, no matter how deep it runs or how powerful it seems. Justice doesn't always come easily, but it begins the moment someone decides to stop being silent. The rules don't belong to those in power. They belong to the people willing to defend them. If you live in a neighborhood governed by an HOA, know your rights. Request financial transparency, attend board meetings, and keep records of all communications. If you receive unjust fines or face intimidation, consult a lawyer and report abuse to local or federal authorities. Install a reliable home security system, and don't be afraid to speak out. Alone, you may be a target, but united with others, you become a force. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the refusal to let fear win.